Our next speaker, it's Dr. Craig Rowles. So Craig graduated from Iowa State University College of Veterinary Medicine in 1982. He moved to Carroll, Iowa, where he entered mixed animal practice with an emphasis in swine until 1996. Craig then left practice and entered into the swine production and served as a general manager and partner of Elite Pork Partnership and 8,000 sow fair to finish operation until 2014. Since then, he was served as a general manager of cage-free operations for Versova Management Company. Versova owns and manages 4 million layers in Iowa, Ohio, Washington, Oregon, Utah, and Colorado. So let's welcome our speaker.
Good afternoon. Thanks for the invitation. Good to be back, see some old friends. I would note that as I came up here today, I was recognizing to myself that it's 10 years ago now that I left the hog industry. And the names, faces haven't changed. You've just gotten a lot older. What is wrong with you guys? So anyway, we're gonna do a few things here today, and so my agenda is. If you've never seen anything about cage-free egg production, I hope that you'll spend a few minutes and enjoy this, because if you've never seen it before, it's really a remarkable livestock alternative to pork production. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and how the impact of that cage-free transition is impacting our industry. We're going to talk about HPAI and foreign animal disease and how that is also impacting our industry today, and we'll talk a little about NPIP and SHIP. So I hope you're in for a wild ride. In the vein of Joe Connor, I have 50 slides for 40 minutes, and so we're going to move along quickly. Just a little bit about production and about the industry in general. There's the 10 top producing states in the United States. Obviously, Iowa is number 1, Ohio is number 2, and we're the largest producer in both of those states. Interestingly enough, number 10, California, was number 1 for a long time. But just like in the hog industry, you know, the cost of production, of bringing the production back to the Midwest for lower priced grains, eventually, once as an industry, we understood how to scale our production up into large production models. You know, it came back to the Midwest for production. As you look at us today, we've been in this transition of animal welfare model and change for about the last 10 years, 15 years. You know, we go back to the California 2002 prop, which was, you know, significantly earlier than the 2012 transition that occurred. And today, we're at about 34% cage-free versus caged. And I predict that we'll be in the 50-50 range by the time we shake out. And shake out would be in the next 4 to 5 years. How do our products work? Everybody's used to going into a grocery store and seeing eggs in the grocery store, right? And that accounts for about 60% of the eggs that are produced in the United States. But there's also other markets for eggs, processed eggs. And in fact, for us as an individual company, 75% of what we do goes into the processed market. So when I say processed market, I'm talking about things like when you stay in a Hampton Inn and you get up in the morning and you got scrambled eggs in your hotel breakfast area. They say, here's your cage-free eggs, blah, blah, blah. You know, those eggs are broken on the farm, shipped to a plant, pasteurized, packaged, and then shipped out. Egg production, like sow production, is a constant state of improvement. And so this chart here shows the laying rate going back to the year 2000, and each of those dots represents the improvement in egg production over time. Just like sows and pigs per sow per year, egg production is just constantly going up, and we're constantly asking these little dinosaurs to produce eggs at the edge of metabolic collapse. Again, a little bit about Versova. We started out here in Iowa. In 1996, we had no chickens. and today we're the second largest in the United States with 40 million. 12 are in cage-free. We have 1,900 employees, Iowa, Ohio, and that was the introduction. It is a remarkable group. I'm really proud to be part of this and a partner in that organization. So what is cage-free? All right, well, there's a lot of different definitions, but in essence, it means that they're produced in a way that allows the birds to roam around. All right, instead of being on wire, they have to have access to the floor. They have to be able to turn around, flap their wings, and do all the normal chicken things that they would do. And there are several prescriptive requirements that we go through with our certifying bodies, and those include people like American Humane, the USDA. There are all kinds of different certifying agencies that we then put their certifying sticker on our products that we sell to ensure that we're meeting their requirements. They're very prescriptive. So a square foot of space per bird, 6 inches on a perch, 3 inches a trough. I mean, it's very, very specific, and that's part of the process that we go through when we're designing these systems, is to make sure that we're meeting all of these requirements. What is driving cage-free production? And there are two things. First of all, there's the political realm, the state ballot initiative states. And so there's been a number of states that have done that. And the second is just corporate commitments. And this really got driven about the time that California did Prop 2 in 2012, I think. And so we were already starting to do that in the state of California. And then a number of other states subsequently went through. So California, Nevada, Oregon, Washington. And if you look at the numbers and you look at the population, you got 89 million people, or 27% of the United States, live in states where their states require cage-free production. I told you that we're at 34%. So we're within reasonable bounds of what the state requirements to be and what production is occurring. The second commitment that we're talking about has been from corporates who all came out and said, we're going to transition into cage-free in our marketplace, right? That really began when McDonald's made their announcement. And once McDonald's fell, that was kind of a bellwether event for our industry. And so a whole bunch of different corporate entities made the commitment to go to cage-free. And as you look at the screen, you can see that down at the bottom, if everybody made that commitment, then 67% of the eggs in the United States would have to come from cage-free. And the vast majority of that, as you can see, is in the grocery area. So here comes the big but, all right? The big but is the way those decisions were announced, there were always some nuances in the language of what they said they would do. And in particular, I would draw your attention to two large retailers, Walmart and Kroger. And so Kroger came out in August of 22 and said, well, we don't really expect to achieve our goal of 2025 of 100% cage-free. We hope to get to 70% by 2030. And they didn't really say why, but the reason why is that consumers weren't necessarily buying or willing to pay the difference in cost between cage and cage-free. That's really what it comes down to. Likewise, Walmart came out in April of 2016, announced their goal to transition to 100% cage-free by 2025 based on the available supply, affordability, and customer demand. Well, Walmart is a big customer of ours. Almost all of our eggs in Ohio go to Walmart. A lot of the eggs that are up in the Wright County area go to Walmart. And so we talk to them all the time. And here's an interesting aside, is that while cage-free production, retail sales have increased, they're not on pace to support 100% conversion to cage-free in Walmart by 2025. So they're just simply saying that, well, guess what? Our customer base, the Walmart customer base, isn't necessarily willing to pay. In fact, they did some really interesting studies where they price pointed cage-free versus cage at different prices at different stores across the United States. And the Walmart customer essentially told them that they were willing to pay 10 cents a dozen more for cage-free. all right? Well, I can understand that, but the problem is it costs about 40 or 50 cents more to do it. And so there's your problem. There's your rub. Walmart essentially today has told us privately, you know, we'll switch when the states do a ballot initiative and when we have to. So the answer or the question to you guys, you know, is cage-free production is going into the California Prop 12 process. Now that's a state ballot initiative, so that's either an opportunity to go after it, which is, as a company, we've said that we were willing to make that investment to go after it. But it's really a dicey question when you ask yourself, am I going to make that investment? The only way we do it is through a contractual relationship that ensures that we are going to get paid to do it through the length of the mortgage of the time that it takes to pay off that equipment. All right? It's a really important point. I would not ever do that on the come. So what does cage-free look like? So this is a drone shot from Sioux Center, Iowa. And the first three buildings in the foreground represent cage-free buildings that were completed a couple years ago. I think the first thing I would point out is that these facilities, these farms, are really, really large. There's 4.2 million birds on this farm. Oh, wait, we had avian influenza there a month ago. There are no birds on this farm today, all right? But you can see in the middle ground, you can see a feed mill. Here's a shot from the south. You can see, I don't know if, as soon as I do this, I'm sure I'm going to mess it up. Oh, there you go. All right, so here's a feed mill. This is a processing plant, so we actually break the eggs here, and this is our biosecurity building. We've invested, you know, $2.5 million in a biosecurity building for showering in. Think about showering in and out 60, 70, maybe 100 people on a given day. So you got to have a facility that can handle the flow of traffic, all right, coming through this. And then these are all caged barns here. This is all manure storage, and these are our cage-free barns here. So what does it look like? So this is a schematic of what a cage-free barn looks like. To give them the space that they need, you have to either go out or up. And so this particular farm is a 4-story building in order to get all the birds in there. There's 4 stories, 4 levels. Each level is a separate ventilation scheme. And this is what it looks like schematically. The air comes in over here on the eave, comes through a plenum, and then is drawn out this way. Here's what it looks like under construction. So you can see we build the shell of the building, and then once the building is installed, and you can see I-beams along the outside walls, you know, and then we build the aviary equipment system within that structure, and just layer it onto those outside I-beams, so it really floats in there. All right, so those of you that have never been in a cage-free chicken barn, let's see if this actually works. My God, it's going to work. So I walked in and I said, let's just take a view. What does it look like in the middle of the day when you walk into a cage-free chicken barn? So this is taken off of my my cell phone, and that's kind of what it looks like. It's a completely different environment. We've really had to focus our people who used to basically pick up dead chickens and fix egg jams and sweep. Now they actually have to have some animal husbandry skills. And so we really have to upscale and teach our employees, you know, how to manage birds and look for problems, look for ventilation problems, look for, you know, making sure they got feed to them, and the water and the nipples and the nest boxes. It's a whole different ballgame in terms of training. This is just some still shots of what it looks like. The feed comes in a chain-driven trough. So the chain makes a circle around, and it's pulling the feed around in a circle, and we feed them early on when we're trying to get consumption stimulated. They probably get fed 5 times a day. Once we reach a point of them reaching our target consumption, then we might slow them down to 3 times a day feeding. But you can see that bird with his head tipped over. Likewise, just like in a hog barn, we use nipples for water. And then we have these little nest boxes that they go in to They're shady, they're quiet, and they can go in and lay their egg in peace and comfort. And this equipment that we're using came from Europe because they've been working on cage-free production systems for at least a decade longer than anybody in the United States. And this equipment really it's really remarkable how it was designed, engineered to work with the bird's natural behaviors. And so from a lesson for you guys is that as you go to group housing, et cetera, you have to really think about what are the natural behaviors of a sow and how should we design our systems to work with the natural behaviors of the sow. These farms are also processing plants, right? I showed you that slide or that drone shot earlier, and it showed the processing plant. Here we break the eggs. All right, and so we have a USDA inspector on site all the time while we're in operation. This is a picture of the washer. So the eggs come out of the barns and they go through this washer first. And after they come out of the washer, it looks like this. And this is one line of 3 in this particular plant. So they've come out of the washer and they're going into the breaking machine. And each of these lines can do 250,000 eggs an hour. All right, so now I'm gone past the wall. We're on the back side of the breaking machine. And just think about this. Each of these little eggs get whacked with a little axe that causes the shell to crack, and it falls to the side, and we capture the yolk and the white separately. So if we need to separate those products, we can. But if we want to homogenize it and put it back together, we do that later. So look at the speed of how those eggs are rolling through this machine. It's all about throughput. And then, of course, you're going to see that you've got somebody looking for bloods or dirts or problems. After it goes through that machine, the breaking machine, then we have to bring that product down to a refrigeration temp. And so this is a picture of basically a radiator. All right, we use huge glycol freezing machines to lower the temperature of that egg product from, coming out at maybe it's 90 degrees coming out of the barn in a summer day. We got to get it down to 35. And when we get it down to 35, then we move it into a stainless steel tanker, a silo that can hold about 3 silos versus liquid product. And when we're ready to ship, we pump from those silos into a tanker like this, and on the road it goes down. So we don't do the pasteurization. Our responsibility stops at that point, and it goes on for further pasteurization and processing after that. So that's what cage-free production looks like. That's what an egg farm looks like. Next thing I want to talk about is high-path AI. So high-path AI is a foreign animal disease that we have been fighting for a number of years. I like to joke that, one of the reasons I left the pork industry was because I was concerned about PRRS, which is an endemic disease that we're fighting. I was concerned about things like ASF. I wasn't vertically integrated, and so I made the decision in 2014 to sell. And in 2015, when I threw all my eggs into the egg business, then we started breaking with avian influenza, another foreign animal disease. And so the poultry industry blames me for being the typhoid Mary. I'll accept that, I guess. But it's been a wild ride. One of the things that we learned out of the 2015 outbreak was that we had a lot of lateral transmission of virus between farms because the biosecurity procedures were not in place. And so we got through 2015, and now the 22 break came, and things started to change because we were not seeing necessarily lateral transmission based on the genetic sequencing, but we're still seeing a significant number of point source infections. From a worldwide perspective, this particular shot is from the USDA, and it shows positive isolations, across the world. This thing really started in China in the late 1990s, and it kind of percolated over there. And historically, what happened with avian influenza is that we would get low-path AI in the United States once in a while, and it would mutate in a turkey farm someplace into high-path, and we would get it stamped out, and then we'd all go on our merry way and back to business as usual. The wild bird population didn't really have a lot of high path AI circulating in it. This particular strain was different because it actually was in the wild bird population. And over the last 10, 15 years, it got over into Europe, in like 21, in that time frame, and really started smacking them. And then it finally came across the flyways into the United States in 2022. And if you look at wild bird isolations in the United States, each of these numbers represents how many isolations they found in states. And the point I want to make is that they found high path AI and wild birds in every state in the continent. It's everywhere, and it's continuing to be everywhere. So from a confirmed detection, and this data is back to February, but 97 million birds have gone down. That includes layers and turkeys both. And it's more than that since then, but 69 million of them were layers. Remember I said there's about 300 million layers in the United States? You know, Howard, there's a hen out there with your name on it, but it could be dead right now. The point is 69 million layers were killed out of the 300 million. That is a big number. Our company, just since the dairy thing, we've lost 6 million birds. So it's a really painful occurrence for us when it occurs. So the wild bird population, if you look at the chart here, the wild bird population is going to be our circulating entity, and I don't foresee how that's going to change. All right? We're not going to impact. I think that virus is going to be circulating in the wild bird population for many years to come. And occasionally you get introductions into a commercial operation, and when it does, it's devastating. And obviously, in the last few months, we've seen several mammalian species that have been also identified. That's what's also different about this particular strain of high path, is that if you look at this, and it's probably hard to read, but there are a number of different mammalian species on there, but they're creatures like ferrets and raccoons and fox. You know, they are carnivores out in the wild that are eating dead carcasses where that virus has been consumed, and it either impacted that particular mammalian species and they found it, but they haven't seen a lot of mammalian to mammalian transmission. That is until April of this year, when in the Texas Panhandle, there was some dairy herds down there that started having problems with sick cows and decreased milk production. And they were unable to figure out what was causing the problem. And there was an Iowa State graduate who was down there and noticed that there were a bunch of dead birds and a bunch of dead cats. And she said to herself, I wonder if this could be influenza. And Texas couldn't figure it out, but she sent samples up here, and Iowa State diagnosed high path AI in dairy cows. And it's interesting because this particular strain is a little bit different than the other ones that we've been seeing, and it's got an affinity for the mammary tissue of a dairy cow. And I was with Drew Magstad, who did the work up at the diagnostic lab, this morning, and basically what Drew says that particular tissue has the right receptors in it for this virus to grow and to be transmitted. It's just interesting. Individual cows essentially can become infected mechanically. In other words, like there are really, really high levels of virus in the mammary tissue, and when you disconnect from a milking parlor machine, they may or may not disinfect it. They just bring the next cow on, and they're literally just inoculating every cow up and down the line. And so it's been spreading fairly rapidly through lactating dairy herds. The second thing you need to know is that the dairy industry is different. They operate differently than the way that we do. And some of these large dairies, they'll have calf raising and heifer springing operations down in the Texas area, and then they would ship fresh cows to wherever they need them. And so if you look at, Texas has had a bunch of cases, but a lot of these cases that are in Iowa, Colorado, et cetera, are related to cow movements from infected to non-infected farms, and then they start that cycle all over again. And so this has really created a problem for us, and it was really frustrating for us at Center Fresh, where I thought we had our best biosecurity ever. We had the showers in place, we had the procedures in place, our people were giving us great compliance, and we broke with this virus in the middle of the farm, in the middle of a barn. And it's very frustrating. And then we lost another farm last week that was a mile away from a dairy in the Weld County in Colorado. The other thing that's important is that we're seeing some human cases associated with it too. So oftentimes workers on these farms that are handling the udders, you can easily understand them getting milk on their hands. They're rubbing their eyes, and so there have been human cases of conjunctivitis and mild respiratory systems, a handful. There hasn't been human-to-human transmission, but the CDC is really concerned about this, and so they're actively involved in some of these investigations. I think the message for pork producers is this. Number one, according to Drew, as of this morning, there haven't been any isolations of this particular virus in pigs yet. Okay? We don't know if pigs have it. Certainly, Amy Baker has done some work where she's inoculated pigs, and there's been a mild bronchiolitis that's occurred, but it hasn't been shown a lot of huge transmission. But we're just one step removed from that happening, and the pigs are a great mixing vessel. All right? They're a great mixing vessel, and so I think there's a chance that we're going to be worried about, avian influenza in pigs someday, and how are you going to handle, for instance, the personal protective gear for your employees that are in your operations? Certainly, we have changed our procedures for making sure that our employees are protected. And so you need to be aware that that kind of thing can happen for you as well. Very quickly, what happens for us if we get an avian influenza break? Well, we get to euthanize all the birds very, very, very quickly. And unfortunately, we're good at it now because we've had the opportunity to do it several times. This is the view of a farm, one of our older farms up in Wright County that went down in November of last year. We use ventilation shutdown plus, which means that you shut the ventilation down, you close up all the inlets, and you add heat to the barn. And it's really important that we do this well, and it's really appropriate that we do this quickly because there's a lot of scrutiny in the world in terms of how we euthanize birds in this environment. Not all state veterinarians are comfortable with this. In Colorado last week, we were able to convince the state veterinarian that we knew how to do this, and she allowed us to move forward with it, and it was an effective way to get the birds down quickly. My point to you is this. If you had an ASF break, do you know how you would euthanize your pigs? Have you thought about it? Because if you haven't, I think you should. Likewise, after you euthanize them, you got to do something with them. So I want you to run through about 1 million birds, and so you got to get them out of the barn. We get them out on the ground. Then we bring in about a half a dozen of these, which are cattle feeder mixer wagons with some sort of carbon material. Now, I don't know the exact recipe. Let's say it's 2 scoops of chicken and 2 scoops of carbon and a scoop of manure, and we got to get rid of the eggs that are on the farm too, and maybe some of the feed. So that all goes into the compost, right? And when we mix that up, we dump it on the ground, and then we put out a layer of dry compost on the bottom, and then we start dumping the compost mix on top, and then we cap it, and then we start temping it. And when we get up to 135 or 140 degrees, then we turn it. And this is an example of the turning process. This is a composting turner that we leased out of North Carolina, $13 a foot to drive through your compost rolls. I want you to think about this. We got 4.2 million birds up in Sioux Center right now. It took 90 acres of ground, 90 acres for 4.2 million birds. So it's not an easy process. And so my point to you is, well, let me finish. So to do 1 million birds, it took 26 heaters, 5 payloaders, 5 tractors, feeder mixer wagons, 150 truckloads of carbon material, 150 people, $2.5 million to do 1 million birds. Here's my question. If you had ASF on your farm today, would you know what to do? Would you know how to euthanize the pigs? Would you know what you were going to do with them after you euthanized them? Because if you haven't thought about it, you better. Okay, last thing on my list then is to talk about NPIP. NPIP stands for the National Poultry Improvement Program, and it was established in the 1930s as the industry was trying to get rid of Salmonella pylori. All right? So it was begun and instigated that it is a democratic group that includes producers, it includes state regulatory officials, it includes academics, and all of these groups came together to establish a system of protocols for eliminating Salmonella pylori. Now that got accomplished many, many years ago, and so they've added to that list to Gallonarium, MGMS, avian influenza, and exotic Newcastle. So what it does is it sets the standards for certification for freedom of disease. And so they have all kinds of, that's why you've got a lot of the academics on there to do the laboratory certifying and sampling standards. And they've also created the biosecurity guidelines and audit guidelines that we use in avian influenza. Those principles are the basis for how we're held accountable. And if we have to follow those protocols in order to be eligible for the indemnity that is occurring when we take our flocks down for avian influenza. So NPIP is very, very important because it allows us to have the opportunity to feed back information to our federal regulators and our academics and our researchers, and we all get together and talk about how things should work, and it provides a formalized process to move things forward. And who cares? Why should we do it? Well, it enables us to know the status of our flocks that we're buying from. So we know that if they come with that NPIP certification, we know what our day-old chicks should be held accountable to. It supports the routine movement of interstate birds. But the most important thing is that it provides a pathway for sustaining interstate commerce and international trade in times of outbreak. So all the while that we've been going through this avian influenza outbreak, our partners in our industries have been able to maintain international trade with their products. And that's important because people like Highline here in Dallas Center, Iowa, they ship birds all over the world. And if they couldn't do that, they would be out of business. And if they go out of business, that would be bad for us too. So, why SHIP? Raise your hand if you've heard of SHIP. So I'd say we're a little over half. That's good because Roger over here, thank you for being here today. I'm putting in a plug. I hope you approve. But he's been leading the effort for the Swine Health Improvement Plan, which is modeled after NPIP. It is modeled so that you can have that same sort of pathway for discussion with the regulators and the academics and producers that can produce those same kind of certifications so that when, if in fact ASF comes to the United States or CSF, I think that's where you're starting, right? Again, it's talking about certification of freedom from disease so that you can enable to move pigs to market in the face of an outbreak. And so for those of you that have not heard of SHIP, my suggestion to you is that you take some time to acquaint yourself with that information because I think that he is heading down the right path for your industry. It will give you the opportunity to have a voice in how regulatory and certification processes are put in place. So that is the end of my discussion. We've got 5 minutes maybe for questions. Yes, sir.
What are you using for carbon source? Where can you find that kind of quantity?
Yeah, what do we use? The question is, what do we use for a carbon source? You know, the great thing about it is, that, you remember that derecho? few years ago. That derecho destroyed a lot of trees in Iowa. And unfortunately, or fortunately, because we've been experienced with that, we've got a guy, Mark, who does almost all of these projects in Iowa, and he knows all the people in the state that have product. So if you ever needed product, you would call me, and I would get you in touch with a guy that knows where all the carbon sources are. But you can still, I mean, corn stalks. Corn stalks are a great carbon source. There's all kinds of options. So, good question. Yes, ma'am.
I have to ask you the question I asked Dr. Kaizen earlier, is that you alluded to that the Sioux Center site was close to a dairy that had it. Excuse me. Do you believe there's airborne transmission then?
Well, I can't prove it. I can't. I can tell you that we really thought we had our best capital investments, our best protocols in place. We broke with AI in the middle barn on a middle level in a middle building. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's where the virus came in. That's where we just saw clinical signs first, right? There are a number of us academically who would say, doggone it, aerosol ought to be possible. But yet, if the work that's been done by David Marks, who's a USDA wildlife veterinarian, he's gone to a lot of our farms, because that's one of the mitigation steps that we're taking on our farms now, is we're actually trying to get rid of wild birds around our farms. But he went to several of these dairies and captured, killed, destroyed, whatever, a number of the peri-domestic birds. So a peri-domestic bird is a starling, a sparrow, that kind of stuff. I don't think they have found the virus in any of the peri-domestic samples that they've taken. So we're all kind of frustrated. When there's that much milk or that much virus in a milk sample, those are sick cows, so they're probably taking that milk off to someplace else. And what are they doing with that waste milk? Is it going out into a lagoon where wild birds can then have access to that lagoon? That's problematic. That's why Jeff and I were meeting with the dairy industry this morning to talk about how can we help you on biosecurity. Have you thought about these particular issues? There is a great dialogue that's going on between the poultry industry and the dairy industry right now that we're really trying to work together cooperatively so that we don't continue to reinfect each other. But I don't know the answer to your question. Howard.
Have we had an outbreak in Iowa or surrounding states in meat birds, and if not, why?
We've had outbreaks in turkeys, yes. Several outbreaks in turkeys. Iowa doesn't have we have some broilers over on the west side of the state, but I don't know that.
We have a lot of up north now, too.
Sure. The truth is, I don't think any of them have been infected. And don't ask me why, other than the fact that the 5 or 6 week cycle, and they turn them really, really quick, and
How about the South? Do you know of any cases in the South?
only in broiler breeder flocks. Okay.
Because their biosecurity is probably nothing like what yours is.
Oh, it is nothing. That's why it's so frustrating. We're applying swine practices to the poultry industry, right?
Is that your next venture, to get into meat birds?
No. I should have just bought NVIDIA and slept at home. Sure. Bob.
Craig, do you think that the legislatures around the country are starting to pay a little bit more attention to the consumers and saying, even though we put these laws in because Wayne Cassell told us we needed to, the consumers aren't gonna switch. And so, will there be more states that mandate the cage-free or fewer because of the cost to their consumers?
Sure. Great question. So the question is, do I think, I'm going to shorten it by saying, do I think there will be more states that will go cage-free? And the answer to you is yes. I think Illinois is next. the intelligence that we're getting says that Illinois will probably have a ballot initiative in the next 2 years. I think if you go to the southern part of the United States, the Bubba area, I don't think you'll ever see that happen. But in some of the more urban areas, I still think you will see some more ballot initiatives come. I think Ohio is a crapshoot because it's trending a little more conservative in its general population. But I think Illinois is going to go.
So as a follow-up, then, will they have squishy language in their legislation that will allow them to back off from something that's 100%?
Sure. Will they switch? Will they go back? Well, I can tell you that Utah went back. Utah passed the law, we bought the farm, and then they reneged on the law. Okay? And so we've stopped a cage-free construction project there in Utah because they backed off. And so it is the prerogative of a state to change their laws.
Are your barns use air filtration, and what biosecurity apply to your feed inputs?
Sure. So the question is biosecurity related, are we filtered? It's really hard to filter a layer operation. The biggest issue that you have in a layer because the dust and the dander that's created by a bird. And when you get into the summertime, especially, it's 6 CFM per bird. So you take 4.2 million times 6, you come up with how many CFMs rolled through these barns. You couldn't possibly change the pre-filters fast enough. And so I'm looking at other technologies. We're looking at UV light technologies right now. So far they've failed. But for right now, we have focused our biosecurity on the really, really low-hanging fruit, which is hands and feet, right? Walking the virus into the farm is still the #1 way for a virus to get into your farm. And so making sure that the people that are supposed to be in the barn stay in the barn, provide them a good shower, provide them the clothing and the boots that they need, and make darn sure you hold them accountable. So we have cameras up everywhere. If I catch you outside, you're in big trouble. So we focus on that. From a feed perspective, all of our grain is stored inside, right? I mean, so piles of corn stored outside that wild birds can come and eat and consume and defecate on are pretty risky in my perspective. But then that high-path AI virus in a normal environment, meaning stored grain, it won't last very long, right? At warm temperatures, maybe a week. So all of our grain is stored inside. We have plenty of grain to store for several weeks, if not months. And so we're using tincture of time for that risk mitigation factor. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So we've heard that the wild birds are carrying this virus, but some veterinarians will say, is it killing them at the rates that it is the animals that are inside? Is that have anything to do with the genetics, or is it just because they're inside?
So the question is, why don't wild birds die like domestic birds? Well, I would say this, that there are differences in genetics, all right? Turkeys die like flies. You just look at a turkey and it dies just because they die. But they are more susceptible to avian influenza viruses, and then chickens would be next. And the wild birds, as a rule, are less susceptible to dying, or they're able to mitigate that virus in their bodies for whatever the genetic reason is.
Anybody looking at the genetics on your laying to make resistant chickens?
Yeah, that's a great. The question is anybody looking at resistance in our genetics population? And Highline, says maybe in 15 years. Right? Maybe. That's just like what you and I were talking about with PIC and PRRS. It takes a long time to do that kind of work. Roger.
Craig, would you like to just share about the status of the vaccine situation and maybe how you might see that
Sure.
evolving?
There are vaccines available. The problem with vaccines is that there are implications to trade. All right? If you get to a point where you're not able to determine whether it's wild virus or whether it's vaccine antibody serology testing that we do, that complicates factors. And the United States is just as guilty as any other country out there in terms of restricting trade. There is a study going on in France with, and I'm going to butcher this, but foie gras ducks, all right? And that duck industry in France was going to go out of business without vaccines. So they said, we're going to try vaccine and see how it works. It seems to be working reasonably well, based on the anecdotal evidence I've seen. But the moment that France put that in place, we in the United States stopped imports of any avian products from France. So at the world trade level, at the WOA level, we're going to have to figure this out, because we're not on a sustainable path with what we're doing right now. And so that is really what has to happen in the long run. I don't think that eradication of the birds that we're doing today is in the best interests of our industry or anybody else for that matter.
If you look at how it spread so fast around the world, it's not going to be that long before every country is endemic.
Every country is endemic already.
Yeah, and have an outbreak. So, when that happens, it's going to be a lot easier to convince lawmakers that, hey, we need to do
Right.
something different than killing all of our birds.
Right, but it starts in China, and China's the first one that wants to shut it off, right? So, I mean, it's the way it is. Sorry, I'm running late.
No, that's fine. So let's take our speaker.